Hello. Today's guest is Denise Shrivell. Denise is a political campaigner, commentator, podcaster, and a contributor to the independent media space. Denise has been involved in successful independent campaigns, and her vast experience in politics and media has made her an energetic and passionate figure of the independent space. Denise joins us to talk about the state of independent politics, the challenges facing independent candidates, the problems with major party bipartisan duopoly politics, and the value of independent media in the concentrated legacy Australian media landscape. Thank you very much for joining us today, Denise Shrivell. Long time coming, and it's great to have you on here.
Oh, such a pleasure to be here, Joel. Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, look, we've got a lot to talk about today, and I suppose I would love to kick it off with just sort of learning a little bit about yourself. You're a political campaigner and a commentator and a podcaster, and you seem to do a million and one things. So can you just start by sharing a little bit about your journey into this community engagement political realm?
Yeah, well, I completely blame Nick Ross actually for a tweet that he did maybe 10 years ago now, which is a bit of a frightening thought. Where Nick Ross basically tweeted, and this was, when I was very new on Twitter. It was really, I wasn't sort of a big tweeter at that stage by any means. And he basically tweeted along the lines of, "Today I've been made redundant from the ABC. That's okay because now I can potentially talk about the NBN again." And I kind of went, what's going on here? Because working in the advertising, media, and communications sector, the connectivity to push our messages through is very important. So the NBN was certainly something that, as an industry, we were having some talks about how it was structured and how it would impact, again, the messages that we could send down the pipes to reach audiences, whether they be news consumers or media consumers or advertising consumers. So that sort of piqued my interest. I then, I suppose, went down a rabbit hole, for want of a better term, a good rabbit hole in this case, not one of the other rabbit holes that we've come to know far too well, Joel, where I learned really that Nick had pretty well been sort of stymied from speaking quite truthfully about the NBN. I learnt then, again, followed him. He then did a series of AMAs on Reddit. He did a series of interviews, certainly with titles like New Matilda, as an example, where I really learned that there was a great mismatch between what I was reading and consuming in mainstream media about the NBN and what the truth was. I also then, of course, started reading a lot of experts. So I suppose that was the first opportunity that really, for me, planted that seed of doubt that what I was consuming in media, and a media ecosystem or a media industry that I was a part of and worked for quite some time. So that was really sort of I suppose, the thing that started my interest, just that little seed of doubt. And then, of course, once that was planted, I then went, what else have I been misled about? And once you realize that, Joel, I think, for us people who are quite political now, I think we can all probably pinpoint the time that we went, oh my God, I have been quite misled, or oh my God, what I've been told or what I was thinking is actually quite different to reality, and I really need to do something about this. So, to a very long answer to your question, was Nick Ross really put me down this path. And I made, I suppose, quite a conscious decision some time ago, even before I became political, that when I saw a problem, I was going to tangibly do something to address it. Instead of just talking about it, bitching about it, which we do plenty of that on Twitter, there's no doubt about it. But I also, as I said, made a really conscious mindset decision that I was going to put forward tangible solutions to the issues that I saw. So that really sort of started my political journey.
What a beginning to a political journey that
One
is.
tweet, one tweet. Nick Ross has said to me that was quite a tweet when I told him that story.
Personally, my journey started with the tweet too. So what a dangerous place Twitter has been over the years for many of us. So, you came across this challenge, and then you somehow managed to become a conduit to put that challenge into local politics and to start expanding that into your constituency and your area. So, how did you begin making that transition from that eureka moment into action, into becoming an actuator, a political actuator?
I suppose my first steps into political advocacy were on the basis of that NBN issue that I saw. So I started to do a bit of advocacy within the comms, media, and advertising sector. So I was basically talking about the NBN, which, of course, at that time, Labor had quite, been far from a perfect, but quite a good NBN. We were going to get, 93% full fibre, 7% in rural and regional areas. We're going to get Sky Muster, so satellite. It was quite an elegant, simple solution. Of course, then the Liberal Party came along and just basically pulled that apart. I did note some articles actually just yesterday that said that the Labor Party are putting effort into fixing the NBN yet again. I mean, this has been like a 15-year journey that really should never have happened. Again, we see an example of the Labor Party coming up with not a perfect, but a good plan, and the Liberals, for purely political decision, purely political reasons, come in and just ruin it. I think we've, again, being political now, I think we can probably point to many issues or many examples of that. The carbon price was raised with me yesterday as just one of them. In terms of getting into sort of more local politics, of course, we were noticing what was going on in Indi, very excited about what was going on there with Cathy McGowan. The next campaign after Cathy McGowan, and it was a lot of people from my area in Sydney, which is sort of the northern beaches, northern suburbs, were heading down to Indi to find out what had happened. So I was hearing about this a little bit, and then of course Zali's or Voices of Warringah and some activation in Warringah started to happen. That was the next door electorate to where I was. In North Sydney at the time. So I got to know them, got a little bit involved, and so on. Zali, of course, successful in 2019. And then we started to think, hey, North Sydney, let's give this a go. So we basically, like many voices of groups and many stories that are now repeatedly told within the community independence movement, there was 8 of us that sat around, said, let's try and find let's at least start the process of maybe looking to get a candidate up in the next election. It was then, the 2022 election. And that's really how it started.
That's an amazing story, and connecting with.
And quite a common story, Joel, around the country. Quite a common story around the country. It really just takes some people to get together, make a decision, and start putting the work in.
Well, and the story that seems to have that Indi seat in it too. And Cathy McGowan, I've heard about this pilgrimage to Indi from a few areas now where people just had to go and check it out. It's incredible. I mean, I've had contact with Dennis Ginnivan, the soothsayer
Yes.
of Indi, over the years, and it's incredible how that model inspired so many around. And so you're actually saying that was also an inspiration for some of those Sydney independents early on as well, right?
Oh, definitely. And all of the community independents, the voices of type groups, then leaning on to candidate, everyone does it. My experience and my observation is that every group and every electorate does it a little bit differently. But based on their unique community, based on the skill set that they might have involved in their group and so on. Everyone does a little bit differently, but the core premise is always there, which is the community first comes together. They then go out and gauge the interests and views of the community. Basically, what you're trying to prove is a mismatch between the views and interests of the community and then how you're being misrepresented. And showing that mismatch then gives you the trigger, for want of a better word, to start putting the plans in place to go and find a community independent, which is really what we did in North Sydney. And now, of course, has been replicated in so many electorates around the country.
Now, I really want to explore some of the similarities and differences here. I mean, you got Indi out there in northern Victoria with a completely different population, demography, and many different factors. I know that they use these sort of kitchen table sessions out there in Indi, and I was just wondering, like, is there an essence of a good independent campaign that is translatable to anywhere, any electorate in Australia? Or are there some really like bespoke and nuanced kind of considerations that really end up making quite a unique campaign in each seat?
I think every campaign is unique, but again, I think that there are some core themes, for want of a better word, that really, and it's more process than anything. So, yes, again, gauging the views and interests of the community through the kitchen table conversation process, through a politics in the pub type process, through even online surveys. Really, that's community engagement, community building, and community listening is a really common thread that you'll see throughout the community independence movement. Um, and then again, as I said, you're trying to prove that mismatch between how you're being represented and what the views and interests of the community are. That's a pretty common theme. Um, Again, every seat does it a little bit differently because every seat is different. I know in my own seat, Bennelong, as an example, where I am now, having been redistributed out of North Sydney, it's an electorate that is so different even within its own unique boundaries. And I think about an electorate like Durack in Western Australia, which is, I think, between Perth and Broome, but apparently it's larger than Victoria. So having electorates like that is incredibly challenging, but not impossible by any means. And again, it makes you approach how you would put a voices of group and how you would do that quite differently, depending on the unique makeup and composition of the electorate. But I also think about the people who are involved in the voices of type groups. It's also the work that you do and what your capabilities are also going to be largely dependent on who's involved and the skills that they have. You need, some comms skills, you need graphic design, you need a website, but there are some quite hard and fast standard things that you need to be able to do to be campaigning, and you need the skills of the people to be able to enable or do all of those things.
And I imagine in a place like Durack, drawing those resources from four corners of a place like that would, present its own challenges that are unique to Durack.
Completely,
Yeah.
completely. And again, they're, in an area like Sydney, as an example, where required skills are perhaps a little easier to come by. I do think that there's a reason that we see the community independents do well in some of the more city-centric seats, perhaps because some of the skills are a little more readily available. The required skills are a little more readily available there.
The logistics of an independent campaign across this broad country, yeah, you could write a book about that in its own right. And I wonder if there is a handbook that could be written that can capture the essence of a good independent campaign and those kind of Venn overlaps, those crossovers that can be translated to other seats.
Well, as you would know, there are several books that have been written about the community independence, certainly after the last election. So yeah, there are certainly little hints and breadcrumbs, I think, about, some of the tactics, some of the strategies, some of the, the skills that are required in those numerous books that have now been written.
Including one by our very own Dennis Ginnivan, right?
Dennis Ginnivan has written a book. Brooke Turner, Simon Holmes Court wrote a book. There's been Cathy McGowan, of course, has also written a book about her journey in Indi. So no, there are numerous books. Tim Dunlop has also written a book about the community independence movement. So there are numerous books around. There's a couple of academic papers around as well, which is also really interesting.
I would like to look at how you perceive the value of a good independent, and how it can kind of challenge the status quo and the democracy. Uh, and also looking at the history of independence, where you were in the in North Sydney, was there a history in the past somewhere decades ago where there was a spirit of a community independent many moons ago that you could tap into?
Was there ever, Joel? What a good question. So Ted Mack, who's considered the grandfather of independence, actually was the member for North Sydney. He was also a councillor a state member and a federal member, so quite unique in that way. He's also very well known for having quit, I think, his federal seat the week before he was eligible for his parliamentary pension, which of course back in those days was quite a big thing to do because it was quite a sizable pension. So he was a man with a lot of integrity. He also served at all levels of government, and I think that he's a really wonderful example of what an independent can do within the community, within communities, again, at all level of government. And we were really fortunate that we had him to point to in North Sydney as, being part of our heritage. And we did that pretty actively.
We have a similar story in the 90s with Phil Cleary in our seat of Wills,
Yes.
who was just a local kind of a figure, very respected, back-to-back captain coach, I think, at Coburg Lions there, and a big campaigner against domestic violence. And he was a quintessential figure of the neighborhood that really put his own kind of brand on this independent campaign. And yeah, I'd like to think if my seat can sort of boogie into that space one day, we can channel on the ghosts of the past to, yeah, build something good as well. So I would like to ask you, what is the value of having a good independent?
I suppose the way I think about the community independence, once they are successful, and first of all, I'll just say that there are many levels of success. My view is that just getting more people involved and engaged in politics within your community is such a massive success. That's a really great tick. If you can get more people just leaning into democracy a little bit more without even putting up a candidate or running a successful candidate, I think that that's such a massive win in itself. My experience is that the noisier the community gets and the more they engage in local politics, the more engaged the local member will also get, even from a major party. My saying, Joel, and I say this quite often on Twitter, so anyone who follows me on Twitter will know this, they only do their job when they think they're going to lose their job. So getting more people engaged in politics puts some pressure on, sadly. I will never forget, and a former Prime Minister, how now and then they say the quiet part out loud. I will never forget one day, I think it was actually Tony Abbott who said, no, we want them concentrating on the back pages, not the front pages. They do not want us being engaged in politics at all or being interested. There is a reason that politics don't like Twitter. And I understand, Twitter at the moment is obviously very different to when you and I started on Twitter, but they don't like people to be politically engaged. So I think that that's sort of, that community engagement is a really strong value. The other thing that I'll highlight is integrity in decision making. So I frame a lot of the issues that we face are a symptom of a flawed decision-making process by the major parties. The major parties have too many stakeholders that they have to take into account when they make a decision. The community independents have only their community. That means that there's no donors, no factions, no self-interest. It is purely their community that they take the views, the needs and interests of the community that when they're making decisions. So I think that integrity in decision making to me is a really underlying value of the community independence movement. Of course, words like attributes like transparency, integrity, fairness. I will also always look for kindness and empathy in anything that I try and do and anyone that I follow in politics. I think that they're just such important qualities. Empathy, compassion, and kindness, I think, are really important values in politics, particularly in this day and age.
And in an electorate that's been belted around but by two major parties for decades, some empathy and kindness is something I suppose that's really needed in an electorate. That's been damaged by the duopoly for so long.
Oh, well, I think in politics in general, well, could we say society in
Yeah,
general at the moment?
yeah.
At the moment, Joel, I mean, my goodness, it's just such a concerning time that we live in, to say the least. And you're right, kindness, compassion, and empathy, I think, would go a long way in some of the events that we're currently seeing.
And it must be a very transformative thing, being a part of that in a community and feeling that connection with others. And it's something that's been put to sleep by the bipartisan political class in this country, and it's the secret essence of what Australia is all about. Is sort of like standing up with your community and having a chat. It really is what this modern country, was sort of built on.
We often reflect, with people that I speak to in the movement, that we all get involved for political reasons. We get involved for political outcomes, but the best bit and the most unexpected bit has been the people that we've met along the way. It is truly a joy to get involved with others in your community for such wonderful, substantive, and positive reasons. Um, I have seen lifelong friendships being formed by people coming together through community politics. It's been just such a wonderful, positive, constructive, affirming thing to get involved with.
As opposed to lifelong friendships being destroyed, debating over, major party politics. I would like
Well,
to.
it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that there's not disagreements along the way and, all of
Totally.
that sort of thing. But on the whole, it's been such a positive, wonderful experience.
So this is a wonderful experience, as you say. It's something that is, channeling something quite important, and refreshing in the community. And we have former prime ministers saying they want us to be on the back page. You have social media bans coming into place to try and keep our kids away from the Twitter that you just spoke about. Uh, in 2022, the independents really came in out of left field and shocked the system almost. In places like Kooyong and Goldstein, and up in New South Wales, we saw these, incredible campaigns that like stunned and shocked the establishment party. So now we have the 2025 election, and we saw the independents pushing uphill a little bit more with regards to what was in place for the major parties. Have you noticed some strategies from the major parties aimed at countering the rise of independence? And
Well, electoral reform for one, Joel, I'll raise that. So that certainly starts kicking in soon. Um, I suppose if we had a thought about it, yes, the major parties I think will increasingly circle their wagons to protect the duopoly, and they'll circle the wagons against anyone who's coming to undermine or in any way have a chink, have a chink in their armor. So my view in 2022 is that they largely didn't see the community independence coming. We were probably a bit underestimated. But that certainly was not the case in 2025, where, yes, there was a lot thrown at most, if not all, the campaigns. So it was a very different campaign that was experienced in 2025 to 2022 for those reasons.
totally, and we saw some of the independents on the back foot in their own seats, only one term in. And I wanted to ask you about, how the times have changed. And I'm sort of asking, is there an issue with some of these independents where they have to struggle now to, meet the return of their foe, and it limits them somewhat in being able to fight for what they were promising to begin with? Is this an emerging issue?
Well, it could be, and I suppose my first thought is what an absolute shame and sort of blight on our democracy it is when that happens. I mean, you're exactly right. My perception is that the Liberal Party are looking at the community independent seats, particularly in what we would recall what was previously regarded as those blue ribbon seats. They've regarded them in some ways as a bit of a born to rule. They're my seats. It's sort of an entitled thing. And yes, they put effort into getting those back in 2025. And instead of a contest of ideas, it becomes more of an attack. And I think, anyone again listening or watching this pod today, Joel, will agree that that's not what any of us want to see in our democracy.
I remember the effective nature of Oakeshott, Wilkie, and who was the third independent there back in the Gillard era, and how they managed to
Winsey.
that's right. How they managed to wreak havoc, essentially, in that Gillard minority government, and push through more bits of legislation that we've ever seen in the modern era.
Isn't that so curious that um, you and I know that, Joel, because we look for these things and we see these things, that the most legislation like ever or on record was passed through that minority government. But for some reason, anytime a minority or the thought of a minority government is raised in federal politics, all of a sudden, you just get these huge pylons of chaos, where in fact the real experience is that it's a government and a parliament that worked extremely well.
And it feels like almost that Washminster system was designed for that kind of scenario that we have. Because yes, as you said, it did work well. There was a lot of manners. There was a lot of going back and forth. There was a lot of giving people the benefit of the doubt that was happening in that time.
Sounds like democracy to me, Joel.
Yeah, and now we have Labor sitting there with their chiefly mandates, and the
Oh,
the the,
yeah.
the independents now are sort of sitting across with the Greens. The entire crossbench is kind of limited somewhat. In the Senate, we have some, ability to move and shake, but is there an issue now for the crossbench to try and find political relevancy in the near term? Because Labor looks to enjoy its majority while also parlaying with the coalition more often than not, and signaling that it's going to look to get most of its heavy lifting done with the approval of the coalition, and it's set that pattern. So how do independents and how does the crossbench stay relevant in the next period? And will, our centrist kind of, is moving to the center, which I personally noticed with a lot of the independents. They've lost a little bit of their radical luster. I think just the virtue of their initial campaigns were radical, and now due to expediency and survivalism, I think a lot of these independents are trying to find a safe space so they can sort of function and survive. But that comes at the expense of like vision and a more radical and progressive platforms. So what are the challenges, moving ahead for these independents, and how do they keep relevant?
Gosh, I mean that's a good question. I mean, I think staying relevant, you're laser focused on your community. I mean, they are there to represent their community, so you are laser focused on that. And certainly, again, my observation since seeing more on the ground politics, you don't realise how incredibly busy those electoral officers are. I mean, they are virtually customer service departments. So you're getting phone calls and emails and correspondence day in and day out from your constituency, and you're helping your constituency navigate what is, as anyone who has navigated a government system. I'm certainly doing it a little bit at the moment in the aged care sector. And it's a really challenging beast to navigate. So certainly one of their priority roles is to serve the needs of their community and to be that front person for government services in their community. So that's one way that they're certainly staying relevant. I'm certainly seeing a lot of them, turn up still. They're still doing listening posts, and they're still doing numerous community events, and they're still doing local media. They're still doing lots of social media. They are out there working in their communities incredibly hard. And that is the first priority, I think, of any candidate or any sitting MP, independent or not independent. But the community independents certainly do that very well, I think, and work that very hard. In terms of their impact in the parliament, you're quite right. A lot of us were, of course, hoping for balance of power. There was a lot of talk about that before the last election. That went pretty well out the window with a 51 seat majority. But I do think that the Labor Party is better at working slightly more constructively with a crossbench, who is willing to work constructively with them also. I do think also the community independents can play a role in getting public opinion on their side for big issues. A lot of them are very vocal. I've seen them being very vocal, of course, about issues around climate. I've seen them getting vocal about issues around AUKUS, the national integrity, the NAC, of course. Helen Haynes is particularly very vocal about that. David Pocock, I mean, he is an independent. I know he doesn't get sort of included too much as a community independent, but he's very effective in the Senate. So I think they all have their own role to play, but their first priority was indeed to be the best local community representatives they can possibly be.
So look, I'd like to take it to another realm of independent thinking and action, and that's independent media.
Oh, I love it.
And you've expressed a lot of enthusiasm for independent media, as you just did there, and it's got a bit of a growing influence. I am personally involved in it as well, and I've noticed the vacuum, and that's sort of what got me into it. And I think it's still a quite a nascent sort of space that's developing. And you have platforms Spin Proof and True North. And what role do independents play in amplifying community voices and independent ideas and politics?
Independent media.
Sorry,
Well, first of
independent
all,
media. Yep.
yeah, first of all, I'll congratulate you, Joel. You're doing a fantastic job. You're certainly doing a lot of podcasts at the moment, which is great. Which is great. But I'm so excited by what I'm seeing go on in the independent media sector, independent news media sector. Not only great publications from Michael West to Crikey, The Guardian, Anthony Clan at the Claxons doing such a great job, Alex McKinnon at Deep Cut doing a very good job. Just so exciting that and very vibrant what's going on in that sector. I'm also really excited by the commentators that we're increasingly seeing, from Punters Politics to Hannah Ferguson. Matt Tui's doing such a great job as well. Really exciting. Amy Ramikis is doing such a great job with her pajama politics on Instagram. She's got a Substack now as well. Numerous podcasts coming up from yours. Spin Proof. Of course, we're also now doing the Sunday Shot every Sunday morning at 9 a.m., which we're getting such fantastic guests. So it's really such a vibrant and exciting sector, the media sector. Through True North, which I started maybe 18 months ago, but has been in my head now for 5 or 6 years. So I finally got around to doing it. And basically the idea was that the independent news media sector is a very fragmented sector. So it is quite difficult to navigate, particularly for those that perhaps aren't as familiar with it as you and I, Joel. So the idea of True North was really to curate articles into one central location to make it easier for people to access that kind of journalism. So True North is a weekday newsletter that goes out every afternoon about 4 or 5 p.m, where I add about 10 articles from the independent news media sector. I think today will be around the 370th newsletter that I've done. So it's quite a task. I'm just a machine now with it, where I just get up and do it. But every afternoon, Joel, when I press send, I'm just so excited and so thrilled by the quality of the journalism, the passion, the detail, the accuracy. I just see such a mismatch between what we see in mainstream media compared to independent news media. I really do think that independent news media is doing the heavy lifting in public interest news media in Australia. And I'm so thrilled to see that this sector is starting to get an enormous amount of traction. So it's been a delight and frankly a privilege to be able to really be involved in that sector, but also to help support it through initiatives like True North and indeed the Sunday Shot.
The amount of energy and passion you have for what you do, Denise, just stands out every single time. I think it was a bad day where those major parties rolled over you about the NBN there. That they could have saved themselves a lot of headaches. And you're so right. Like, it feels like, what we've seen like recently with the Klaxon on the Envoy scandal, what we've seen from Michael West, the heavy lifting is well and truly in the independent space. And I think it's much to the ire of many that are operating in the legacy space at the moment. I picture there'd be many journalists working in legacy media that would kill to be doing some of the stuff that we're doing. I mean, just personally on this show, I'm interviewing people every week that are such high quality guests, and I don't deserve really to be interviewing these people in my garage. These guys should be on Australian Story, on panel programs, on being expert guests on 7:30 Report. These adjunct professors and PhDs in history and experts here that can't get a gig on the legacy media, and now we're starting to capture these voices and these ideas in this growing independent space, and it feels like we're just sort of at the beginning. Compared to, say, like, we watch a lot of stuff in the United States, and that ecosystem is so kind of vibrant over there now, with the independent space, where it's almost like its own entity, and it feels like Australia's kind of catching up into that space. Do you agree?
Oh, I absolutely do. As I said, I'm so excited about it. I'm excited to see groups like LENA, so the Local and Independent News Association, really starting to hit its stride as well. LENA is an organisation that supports particularly hyperlocal and independent media. So in my sort of local area, we have a hyperlocal called In the Cove. And In the Cove, it's basically taken the spot of what used to be the local suburban newspaper. So yes, they do, the local restaurant opening or the local show or something like that. But she, or Jackie, who runs In the Cove, goes to every single council meeting, and she really plays the role that what you would have considered to be the role of the local newspaper. She plays that role now and does it with such integrity and such passion and such heart. It's just absolutely wonderful to see. LENA, the Local and Independent News Association, was an industry organisation that I played a role in starting some years ago. That LENA now supports 167 hyperlocal newsrooms around the country, which I'm so excited about. So these are people who run either little websites or perhaps even a print publication that serves its own local community. And again, it talks about local council issues, local issues that are relevant to that specific community, that the legacy media just vacated that space long ago, but is still so important to that community.
I remember when the leader newspapers were all sort of bought up by the giants, and yeah, they kind of just like neutered them and hobbled them to they ran them into the ground, and we haven't seen really anything like you're mentioning in decades almost, with that like effective, genuine, truthful, and pertinent information about the community.
Not truthful information, Joel. Oh my God, not truthful information. So I'm very excited about that hyperlocal layer that's happening again in communities and suburbs all over the country. And there are some synergies some people might recognise between that work that I do in the local media area and also in the local political area. It's very localised, community focused work. And again, these to me are just, it makes up the fabric of a local community, the fabric of a democracy in a local community, your local media and your local politics. So I find it really exciting to be playing in both areas. Of course, keeping them very separate, but it's certainly playing in both areas. So we've got the hyperlocal layer, but then we've also got this really interesting growing layer of, as we've spoken about, that independent media, from podcasts to print in some cases, lots of digital platforms, and all these really interesting commentators also that are really rising up, that are using social media particularly in really interesting and effective ways. So I'm just so excited by it. And of course, seeing that people are really engaging through all of this, seeing people more engage in a more positive and effective way in their politics, in their democracy, is wonderful. I've got this T-shirt on here, so I'll just stand up for a sec. Democracy is not a spectator sport. I live that, Joel. And I think if more of us did, then we would be in a much better position. As we all know, we often blame the media, we blame the politicians, but we also have to look at ourselves. The more we engage in politics and the more that we realise that it's actually us that walks into that voting box and votes for the people that make the decisions that we're all concerned about, the better off we'll all be, particularly in Australia, which has compulsory voting, or sorry, compulsory turning up to vote, before anyone sort of gets upset at me. I think the better we'll be. If all of us became more engaged in politics in our own way, then I think Australia would be in a much better place.
And it ticks off a few other boxes too, just by virtue of engaging. It allows neighbors to start talking to one another again. It allows people to start feeling like they're a part of a community, like they got friends in this kind of neoliberal hellscape that we live in, where the fences are a bit higher than they used to be, and people don't talk to their neighbors as much anymore. Something like this can be such a transformative thing. I mean, upstairs wants to keep us divided and conquered, and what you're doing right every day is showing that the natural state of humanity is actually to be out there talking to each other and having a chat. And the natural state of democracy, of a healthy democracy, is for people to be, understanding and communicating with each other at a grassroots level. And that can sort of help, as you said, go upstairs to the state and federal level.
Completely. It's wonderful. And again, everyone I speak to who's involved in community independent politics, at the heart of why they're doing it is for their kids and their grandkids. But one of the unintended consequences has been the joy of getting to know again people in your local community. And again, I've seen lifelong friendships being formed through just people basically getting up and volunteering for a local campaign and opening up this whole new sort of friendship group of people in your community who come together again for positive and substantive change. It's been a wonderful thing to be involved in.
All right, now while I've got you, I would like to speak to you about young people in a democracy, and how young people might be disenfranchised with politics and political avenues more often than not. I remember reading a survey not too long ago where they interviewed a bunch of young high school girls, and essentially it was a very alarming figure where the figure was very low that any of them wanted to join politics as opposed to decades before. And I know these community campaigns are so vibrant and very effective, but I suppose detractors might criticize that there's too many people from older cohorts that are involved with these community independent campaigns, and not enough young people who are the future of our democracy. Firstly, do you agree? And secondly, how can we look to transfer that baton or that torch that you have there to the younger cohorts that hopefully will be picking it up in the future?
I think that's a really interesting question. Again, one of the reasons that I am excited about seeing people like you, like Conrad at Punters Politics, like Hannah Ferguson, like Jack Toohey, like numerous other commentators and advocates popping up, is because I think that they are encouraging younger people to lean into their politics and their democracy a lot more. I absolutely agree that quite often I will be sitting in a room and all of a sudden I'll realise that everyone is perhaps a little bit older. I think partly it's a time thing. So, perhaps we don't have young kids that we're taking care of anymore and so on. So we've got a little bit more time to dedicate to this. I mean, it does take time to be involved in democracy, to say the least. So, again, everyone can play a role, from even wearing a t-shirt to the shops and so on, or getting involved to the level perhaps that you and I get involved, Joel. There's absolutely a role that everyone can play, but the day-to-day of getting involved is perhaps a little more difficult for people who are more time constrained through things like full-time work, part-time work, full-time care, part-time care, whether that be for kids, parents, or whatever. So I absolutely agree. But again, I am encouraged to see more and more young people get involved with local politics, perhaps through the influence of some of the younger commentators that we're seeing really get traction. I think also, and this is perhaps a bit of a sad reflection, there's perhaps some young people are feeling more of a necessity to get involved in politics as well, because there's some big issues that they're facing. I mean, I think of when I was their age, in my 20s, climate change was not an issue on my radar. It wasn't something that was being spoken about. I can now see that it's something that would be it's of concern to all of us. But it's not my 50 or 60-year future, but that is the future of my children. So, it's the younger generations now face perhaps bigger issues, and I can hear people now going, no, we had our issues when we were their age as well. But big issues like climate change, digital media, legacy media, the social media ban that you mentioned before, all of a sudden there are some really big, complex issues that I
Housing,
think the
cost of
younger,
living.
the list goes on. That
Yep.
again, I think about when my husband and I first got into the housing market when we were in our 20s. I mean, that's really out of, it's not a possibility now for so many younger people in a very similar situation that we were in our 20s. You and I both know, Joel, that that's a direct consequence of a flawed decision-making process, and it needs to be addressed. That's why I think it's important for younger people to get more engaged in politics. I do think that the community independence movement gives them a really positive and constructive path to get involved. But I understand also that they're time constrained. Work, education, young kids, there's a lot on people's plates just trying to live now. But
Totally.
certainly, those of us that are involved in the movement and are perhaps a little bit older, we're very aware that we need to reach out to younger people, to minority groups in our. I don't really love that word actually. Minority groups, to those that perhaps aren't as present in the core group. We have to make effort to reach out to others in our community and bring them in and include them. I'm very conscious of that all the time.
Yeah, and using the mobility of maybe delivering such messages might change over time as well with social media, with different outlets of having people engaging in local politics that may not be in the local bowls club, at an evening when they've got their kids' dinner to cook or something like that, or their work or something. But
Well, and for that reason, we might hold a Zoom at 8 o'clock at night, a local community Zoom, because we know the kids are in bed, the day's out of the way, but then of course they're exhausted. They've got to get to work the next day. Weekends are difficult. You've got school sport, you've got to do your shopping, you've got to do your household errands. It is, being involved and engaged in politics. Again, wearing a t-shirt is easy to the shops. That to me is sort of an entry level. So do that, everyone. But it is time consuming, doing what we do, Joel.
the motivation and the fire comes from somewhere, and I think that a lot of young people have the fire within them, and at the moment corralling that fire and that passion, or that sort of a lot of people have a lot of misguided emotion that they don't know where to place, and energy. And potentially it's right here, getting involved in local ideas and politics and things like that.
Exactly. And I would just ask people again to be drawing that line between what they do in the voting box and the issues that they care about. So every single issue has been brought about by what we do in that voting box. So that's really how we will get the greatest impact on the issues that we all get out of bed for every day. From, if you care about homelessness or climate change or housing affordability or what's going on overseas or AUKUS or, even the state of my local park, what we do in the voting box can have such a massive impact on the outcome of those issues. And I would like more people to be drawing that line. I mean, I'm sure that, again, we're speaking here, Joel, no doubt to a more politically informed audience, but now and then you will listen to a vox pop on, legacy media or the ABC or something. It's pretty lazy journalism, really, going up to people and just putting a microphone in front of them and asking them what they think. And I will never forget once, I think it was on the 7:30 report around an election time, someone, a vox pop saying, what's the issue you care about? What are you voting about? And a woman said, I really care about public education, so I'm going to vote for the Liberal Party. And I just nearly fell off my chair. And again, it just really showed to me that people just aren't some people aren't getting it. And I do think that we need to lean more into two segments. News avoiders is certainly an increasing segment of Australians, which I think is a concern, but also what we would regard as those low information voters. And the low information voters are the ones that are probably most vulnerable to mis and disinformation that is put out through legacy media and social media. So more work to really bring them in to local community politics, to local democracy, to local news media, and so on, I think would make a good difference.
Oh yeah, the local campaign can also be a sanctuary from all those, legacy media wolves that are out there picking people to pieces in the wilderness. It is tough, and I see things with, say, like China, for example, and speaking about China as our potential enemy of all
Ah,
time. Yeah, just some of the not lovely people I speak to every day that goes, Joe, what's going on with China? These
yep.
guys are coming for us, and that's just the sedimentary effect of years and years of just legacy media bombardment, even on the ABC now, that's slowly shifting narratives towards, fear and struggle. So yeah, we
Exactly.
can see even very informed people that are quite busy falling for certain narratives that have been constructed over time. So it is a tough one.
And it really is. And even though I do think that legacy media, the influence of legacy media has declined, and there was certainly a lot of talk about that, certainly after the most recent election back in May, where, of course, they could not have gone harder against the Labor Party if they'd tried. And of course, that didn't have the impact that they wanted. In fact, probably the opposite. I, so, of course, that then brought up the conversation about the declining influence of legacy media. I still think that legacy media plays a role in building narrative. The anti-China sentiment that we see so strongly in so much legacy media at the moment. I do think that that can play. That we do hear that when we're speaking to our less informed peers and family members and so on. And that always does alarm me and concern me greatly. I mean, the whole China thing is so frustrating, isn't it? Because no one, there's certainly a lot of talk about, AUKUS and we've got to build this warship and that warship and so on. No one is then asking the question, well, who are we defending or protecting ourselves from? The obvious answer to that is China. And then the next question to that is, well, how do we close that loop because they're our largest trading partner? Where's that conversation in the mainstream media?
Totally. Or amid just a catastrophe happening in the Middle East, Labour makes a pretty pragmatic late decision to recognise Palestine. And yesterday, in the Herald Sun, it said something to elbow rewards Hamas, or something
Uh,
like that. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, there are people out there picking up that paper that is still going, oh, this is a bit horrible what's happening over there. But at the end of the day, elbows rewarding Hamas. And that's what keeps them just right there on that sort of borderline of reason.
yep,
And yeah, we've got the most concentrated, third most concentrated media in the world, and we're seeing it
yep,
play out every day. Denise,
yep.
thank you so much for being here today. I think I'm going to have to get you on again soon if you would dare join us, because it's fantastic having your perspective about this independent lens, which I think gets overlooked a fair bit when we're talking and looking at things.
Thank you so much for having me. I'd love to come back on. We could talk for hours, Joel.
Well, we have before, so I would appreciate, seeing you again, and thank you very much.
Thank you.